Coming as a cheap sports car, the Mazda RX-7 evolved into the poster boy of Japanese high-performance cars in the 1990s, alongside the Skyline GTR and Toyota Supra MK4, eventually becoming a legend. How did this iconic sports car with a Wankel rotary engine travel? Speaking of the Mazda RX-7, of course we can't ignore the iconic Wankel rotary engine with the Japanese manufacturer. It all started in 1961, where Mazda and NSU Motoriwenki AG signed out an MOU to develop the rotary engine, which is known to be powerful but very fragile. After 6 years of developing the rotary engine, Mazda finally found a solution to the rotary engine problem and installed it in the Mazda Cosmo sports car. Mazda Cosmo becomes the first model to use a rotary engine, which was first introduced at the 1964 Tokyo Motor Show and did not go into production until May 1967. 5 years later, the Wankel rotary engine was also embedded in the RX-3, Savannah Coupe Small Coupe lineup in 1972, the RX-3. Savannah achieved success in racing and in the market as a budget performance car. Following the success of the Mazda RX-3 Savannah, Mazda planned to create a cheap sports car with the same performance and styling. Plotted as a rival to Colin Chapman's Lotus Elan, the Mazda RX-7 was born. Although the Mazda RX-7 used the Savannah name popularized by the RX-3, the two were completely different cars. The only similarity was the use of the Wankel rotary engine that was used by both. Designed by a team headed by Matsuburo Maeda, the RX-7 was sold alongside several other Mazda lineups that also used rotary engines. The Mazda RX-7 is here as the successor to the RX-3 Savannah. The first Mazda RX-7 used a 19146C rotary engine coated 12A producing, and happy, mated to a 4.5-speed manual transmission or a 3-speed automatic transmission Jacko 3N71B. The power was not too great, but with a weight of just over 1,000 kilo and a drag coefficient of only 0.36, the RX-7 was a fun car to drive. Its performance was also not to be underestimated. Acceleration from 0-100 km/h could be done in 9.2 seconds, with a top speed of 190 km/h. That was already quite impressive. But the RX-7 had excellent cornering performance. With a low center of gravity and 50-50 weight distribution, the RX-7 could produce a gravitational force of 0.77 benign G when cornering. The first generation RX-7 had excellent cornering performance. In 1981, the Mazda RX-7 received updates in several sectors, starting from the exterior and interior. But the most important thing is the choice of manual transmission, which is now only 5-speed. Also, the increase in the 12A engine from 100 HP to 114 HP. In 1984, the second facelift of the Mazda RX-7 was introduced, featuring a new variant, the GSL SE, which used a Re-EGI 1308 13B twin-rotor engine with fuel injection, a development of the 12A engine. For the Japanese market, the RX-7 Turbo was introduced, using the same 12A turbo engine as the Mazda Luce and Cosmo. The engine produced 163 horsepower. Production of the first generation. Mazda RX-7 ended in 1985, at which point the FC model was ready to continue the success of the first generation with minor but crucial conceptual changes. Following the success of the first generation, Mazda's design team, headed by Akio Uchiyama, conducted a comparative study in the United States to find out why the RX-7 was so well received and what should be done to continue the momentum in the second generation. The FC generation RX-7 received improvements in handling and suspension. Mazda's design team discovered that the American market preferred Porsche's cheap sports car duo, the 924 and 944, and had never heard of the Lotus Elan, which inspired the RX-7, focusing on improving handling and suspension. The Mazda RX-7 FC received several changes in both sectors, starting from the steering system, which was changed to rack and pinion, to the rear suspension, which was changed to independent. Not only that, Mazda also introduced the dynamic tracking suspension system, DTSS, which increases stability on straight roads and more neutral cornering. All these improvements do make the RX-7 FC 363 kilo heavier than its predecessor. But this is offset by the use of a new 13B VDEI twin-rotor engine that produces 146 HP. The turbo used also uses a twin-scroll design to minimize turbo lag. Although the weight of the car is heavier and looks a little more inclined towards driving comfort, the Mazda RX-7 FC received a positive response from the market and the racing world, except in Australia, which felt the first generation was lighter. Mazda had introduced the RX-7 convertible, but it didn't last long. Therefore, Mazda presents a special edition of 250 Sports that has the same weight as the first edition of the RX-7 with various feature cuts, starting from power steering, power windows, to rear wipers. In 1988, Mazda sold the RX-7 convertible for the first time. However, the open roof and the RX-7 were not a good match, and it only lasted until the end of the FC generation in 1992. The third generation Mazda RX-7 FD, the 13B Road engine that complies with Japanese, the design changes of the RX-7 FD, introduced in 1993, abandoned its original concept and evolved into a luxury sports car. On 308C twin-rotor, tax regulations was retained, but not the dimensions of the car, especially its width, were quite significant compared to its two predecessors, where the boxy impression was now transformed into a very aerodynamic and beautiful one. The 13B REW rotary engine uses two turbos with a maximum power of 276 HP. Although the engine used is still the same as the second generation, Mazda introduced a sequential turbo system, where both are active at different engine speeds. The first turbo starts operating at 1/800 RPM by producing a 10 psi turbo boost, entering the upper rotation, the work of the first. Turbo is replaced by the second turbo, which provides an 8 psi boost starting at 4,500 RPM. This twin turbo system runs very smoothly so that it produces consistent power and torque distribution from low to high engine speeds. Power output also experienced a significant jump, with the early RX-7 FD Series 6 producing 252 HP and 294 Nm, and continuing to increase to 276 HP and 313 Nm when the car stopped production in 2002. The Mazda RX-7 is one of the most iconic Japanese sports cars of the 90s. Thanks to its beautiful design, combined with a very capable engine, the Mazda RX-7 FD became the poster boy of Japanese performance cars that boomed in the 1990s, including the Toyota R33, R34, Supra MK4, and Skyline GTR, to the Honda NSX, which is now considered an iconic Japanese sports car of the 1990s. During its 24 years of production between 1978 until 2002, with 3 different generations, the Mazda RX-7 was produced a total of 471,018 units. Starting from a cheap sports car competing with the Lotus E, the RX-7 evolved into one of the legendary iconic Japanese sports cars with its rotary engine. Thank you for watching.